galaxy is a graveyard, an endless expanse of stars, each burning with the light of forgotten wars. Here, in the age of the Imperium, hope is a word without meaning. For every world that thrives, 100 more lie in ruin. And at the center of it all, humanity clings to survival, one heartbeat away from extinction. There are no heroes here, only men and women taken from their homes, stripped of their names, and cast into the fire. They are the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, a tide of flesh and faith, hurled against horrors no mortal should ever see. Billions march beneath the banner of the double-headed eagle. Billions more die nameless, faceless, unremembered. And yet, the line holds. The Guard does not falter because the Imperium cannot afford weakness. But what is it like to be one of them? To trade the light of your world for the endless night of war? To march into battles you cannot win, armed with nothing but faith, a lasgun, and the promise of death? This is not the tale of generals or heroes. This is the story of the forgotten, of those who bled in silence, who died in the mud, whose sacrifice built the walls of the Imperium. And though their names are lost, their fate is shared by countless others. This is the life of a guardsman. The hive towers rise like jagged spears against a poisoned sky. Billions dwell within their shadow, choking on smog, fighting for scraps of food, never knowing a day of sunlight. In the bowels of these endless cities, the Imperium finds its soldiers, not by choice, but by decree. Recruitment is not a call, it is a sentence. Posters of the God Emperor adorn cracked Ferrocrete walls, promising honor in his name. But for those who are taken, it is not honor they find, it is oblivion. Across the Imperium, conscription never ends. On agri-worlds, farmers leave their fields to rot, pressed into endless wars. On forge worlds, the children of laborers are stripped from assembly lines, given lasguns instead of tools. On feral planets, tribes are forced into regiments, their traditions shattered in the name of the Imperium. Each world raises its tithe. Each tithe is a new regiment, bound for a war that may never end. Some regiments march with pride, banners high, songs upon their lips. Others are dragged in chains, their defiance crushed before the first battle is ever fought. The void ships wait in orbit, colossal steel leviathans built not for comfort, but for transport. Tens of thousands crammed into the darkness of their holds, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the recycled air of desperation. Here they wait for weeks, for months, sometimes years, until the order is given. The Guard is not trained to live. It is trained to die, to be expended like ammunition, hurled at the enemies of mankind until nothing remains but corpses in the mud. The commanders know it. The priests know it. Even the soldiers themselves know it. But still they march. For in the Imperium, there is no choice. Billions of worlds burn. Billions more will follow. And somewhere, on the edge of this endless darkness, a boy named Joran Hale prepares to take his first step into the life of a guardsman. Joran Hale had never seen the stars. Born in the Underhive, his world was concrete and smoke, iron walkways and dripping pipes. The idea of a sky, of open air, was a story told by drunks and dreamers. He was 17 when the arbitrators came. The pounding on the door, the barked orders, the rifle butts against his ribs. There was no trial, no question. His family's tithe had come due. They marched him with hundreds of others through the hive streets. Some wept, some cursed. Most simply walked in silence, eyes hollow, as though they had already died. At the shuttle port, they were stripped of everything, names, clothes. Even their hair was shaved away, leaving behind rows of identical skulls. From that moment forward, they were not men. They were guardsmen. The training began before the fear could fade. Endless drills, shouted orders, the snap of shock prods when someone faltered. Eat, march, shoot, pray. Eat, march, shoot, pray. The instructors broke them without hesitation. Those who collapsed were beaten. Those who resisted were executed in front of the others. The lesson was simple. Obedience is life. Defiance is death. Joran's hands blistered from the lasgun drills. His back ached from hours of forced marches beneath a weight designed to crush. Every night, he collapsed onto a steel bunk surrounded by the stench of sweat and fear. And yet, he endured. Each morning he rose, each order he obeyed, each punishment he survived. Slowly, the boy from the Underhive became something else. He learned to strip and reassemble a lasgun in the dark. He learned to march in perfect step, his boots striking in rhythm with hundreds of others. He learned that his life was worth nothing except in the service of the Emperor. The sermons of the Ministorum filled the air. Preachers walked among the recruits, screaming the Emperor's praises. Faith is your shield. Duty is your salvation. The words seared into their minds like brands upon flesh. One by one, the recruits stopped asking questions. One by one, they forgot the lives they once had. In time, Jorn forgot too. When he looked in the mirror, he no longer saw a boy. He saw a guardsman, just another face in an endless line of soldiers. Weeks turned to months. The training fields gave way to the barracks of the void ship, a steel coffin adrift in the abyss, carrying its cargo of flesh toward the next war. Jorn stood among the packed ranks, listening to the ship groan and hum. For the first time in his life, he saw stars through a viewport. Cold, distant, indifferent. It was beautiful and terrifying. Whispers passed among the recruits. Some dreamed of glory. Others prayed for survival. Most stayed silent, knowing what awaited them was death. The first deployment order came in the ship's third month of transit. A red siren. A voice over the Vox, distorted but clear. Prepare for combat drop. Jorn felt his stomach twist into knots. His lasgun was heavy in his hands, though he had carried it 1,000 times. The weight was not steel, but fear. The sergeants barked orders, herding them into the drop bays. Rows upon rows of fresh guardsmen, strapped into harnesses, staring into the void. The ship shook as the first dropships disengaged. Jorn closed his eyes. He thought of the underhive, of his mother's face, of the stories of sunlight he had never seen. And then the doors opened, the roar of engines, the shriek of metal. The smell of oil and burning fuel filled the air. The void swallowed them whole as the dropship plummeted toward war. Jorn Hale, son of the Underhive, had taken his first step into the endless nightmare of the Imperial Guard. He did not know if he would live to take another. The Astra Militarum, the hammer of the Emperor. The countless billions who bleed and die to hold back the darkness of the galaxy. No army in history compares. No empire of old could imagine its scale. It is not a fighting force. It is a flood. A tide of flesh and steel sweeping across the stars. Each regiment is born from a single world. That world pays its tithe in blood as surely as it pays in grain or ore. The farmers of agri-worlds, the workers of hive worlds, the tribes of feral planets, all are taken, molded, and cast into war. There is no single uniform, no single face of the guard. Each regiment carries the mark of its homeworld. The desert raiders of Talern, swathed in scarves and goggles. The iceborne warriors of Valhalla, clad in heavy coats against the eternal frost. The jungle fighters of Katachan, bare-armed, scarred, muscles carved from survival itself. And yet, no matter their origin, no matter their culture, all serve the same master, the God Emperor of mankind. The Guard's structure is vast, but brutally simple. At its heart lies the regiment. 10,000 men and women, trained and armed, divided into companies, platoons, squads, each commanded by officers who themselves are no less expendable than the soldiers beneath them. Above them stand the generals, the Lord Commanders, appointed not for their brilliance, but for their loyalty. For in the Imperium, obedience outweighs genius. Strategy is written in blood, not ink. Alongside the soldiers march the priests of the Ministorum. They carry relics, chant prayers, scream sermons over the thunder of battle. Faith is the only shield the Guard can rely upon. Lasguns fail. Flesh fails. But faith cannot be allowed to break. Commissars walk among the ranks as well. Cold-eyed, black-coated, their duty is absolute. They do not fight the enemy. They fight despair. One word, one hesitation, one moment of doubt, and the commissar's bolt pistol finds the back of a soldier's head. Cowardice is not tolerated. Fear is not forgiven. The Guard marches forward, or it dies where it stands. The logistics of the Guard defy comprehension. Entire planets exist only to supply their weapons. Entire fleets exist only to carry them to war. And still, it is never enough. For the galaxy is vast, and the enemies of mankind are numberless. For every guardsman trained, 10 more are needed. For every regiment raised, a dozen are destroyed. The numbers are beyond reason, beyond recording. The administratum itself struggles to keep count, and so it does not. In the endless archives of Terra, regiments vanish into error. Some are listed as destroyed when they yet fight. Others fight and die without ever having been recorded at all. Entire worlds are erased, their sacrifice nothing more than a blank page in the ledger. This is the true scale of the Guard. It is not measured in victories, for victories are rare. It is not measured in survival, for survival is fleeting. It is measured in attrition, in bodies, in blood spilled upon nameless soil. The enemies of mankind, orcs, tyrannids, the forces of chaos, each should have crushed humanity long ago, but they have not. Because when one guardsman falls, another takes his place. When one regiment burns, another rises from the ashes. When a world is destroyed, 100 more still fight on. This is the grim truth of the Astra Militarum. Each guardsman is a candle in the storm. Each regiment a fleeting breath against the void. They are not meant to live. They are meant to die. And in dying, they keep the Imperium alive. Sergeant Marek had stopped counting the years. Time lost meaning when every sunrise bled into war, and every sunset ended in screams. He had watched entire regiments rise and fall, their names forgotten long before their bodies were cold. His face was a map of scars. A jagged line across his cheek where an orc cleaver had struck, an empty socket where his left eye had been. Each wound told a story, and yet none of those stories mattered. What mattered was the men under his command. Fresh recruits, boys and girls torn from their worlds and thrown into the fire. They looked to him for guidance, for strength. He gave them what he could, even when he had nothing left to give. In the Guard, survival was its own kind of heresy. To live long enough to become a veteran was not a mark of skill. It was a mark of endurance, of stubbornness, of refusing to die when death was all but certain. Marek sat by the fire trench one night, sharpening a combat knife dulled from overuse. His squad huddled nearby, their eyes wide, their hands trembling as artillery rumbled in the distance. He spoke, not kindly but firmly. Don't think about glory. There is none. Don't think about medals. They mean nothing. Think about the man next to you. Think about keeping him alive. That's all that matters. The recruits nodded, some understanding, most pretending. They could not know, not yet. But soon they would. When the order came, Marek led them over the trench wall. Lasguns in trembling hands, bayonets fixed, hearts pounding like drums of war. The enemy waited beyond the smoke. He did not care who they were, orcs, traitors, demons. It made no difference. The first volley of fire cut through the line. Half his recruits fell before they had taken 3 steps. Their screams mingled with the thunder of last fire, their blood mixing with the mud. Marek did not hesitate. He barked orders, drove the survivors forward, his own last pistol spitting bolts of red light. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, but retreat was death, and so was standing still. The only chance was forward, always forward. He dragged one recruit by the collar as the boy froze in terror. The boy's eyes were wide, his lasgun limp in his hands. "Fire, damn you!" Marek shouted, shoving the weapon into position. The boy obeyed, spraying wild shots into the smoke. A shell landed nearby. The blast tore the air apart, hurling men like ragdolls. When the dust cleared, half the squad was gone. Marek forced himself to keep moving. He could not mourn. He could not falter. The living needed him more than the dead. Hours later, when the battle finally ended, his squad was gone. Only 3 recruits remained, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. They looked at him as though he alone held back the abyss. In the silence that followed, Marek lit a low stick, the smoke curling around his scarred face. He thought of the recruits who had fallen, their names already fading from memory. He thought of the hundreds before them, buried in nameless graves. The Emperor demanded sacrifice, and the Guard delivered it day after day, war after war. Marek knew his own time would come soon. But until it did, he would keep leading, because if he did not, no one else would. The veteran sergeant's life was not one of honor or recognition. It was one of survival. And survival, in the Guard, was the rarest victory of all. The Guardsman's weapon is the lasgun, a rifle of stamped metal and plastic, mass-produced by the billions. It is not elegant, it is not powerful, but it fires when the trigger is pulled, and it kills if the shot finds flesh. To the enemies of mankind, the lasgun is a joke. Orcs laugh as its beams scorch their hides. Chaos Marines march through volleys of fire, their armor smoking but unbroken. Even Tyranid swarms push forward, their carapaces deflecting the searing light. And yet, the lasgun endures. Because it is simple, because it is reliable, because for every shot that fails, another follows, and another, until the enemy is buried beneath a storm of red fire. Every guardsman knows the weight of the lasgun, the ache in the shoulder after hours of drill, the smell of ozone as the charge packs discharge, the hiss as overheated barrels cool in the freezing night. But the lasgun is only the beginning. Behind the infantry, the Guard brings its steel beasts, the Lehman Russ battle tank, a block of armored fury, its main cannon roaring like thunder across the battlefield. It is not graceful, it is not fast, but it is unstoppable. For every tank destroyed, 100 more roll forth, their tracks grinding over corpses and rubble alike. Artillery is the Guard's true language. Basilisks and earthshakers thunder from miles away, flattening entire cities with a single barrage. The soldiers in the trenches never see the targets, never hear the screams. They only feel the earth shake beneath their boots and know that death has spoken. Where artillery fails, heavier weapons answer. The Shadow Sword, armed with a volcano cannon, capable of piercing even the armor of a titan. The Hellhound, belching gouts of fire to cleanse the unclean. The Hydra, raking the skies with flak to tear enemy aircraft from the heavens. And towering above them all, the Baneblade, a super heavy tank, a moving fortress of steel and fury. Its cannons level fortresses, its guns drown armies in fire. When a Baneblade rolls onto the field, even the bravest enemies tremble. But weapons alone cannot win wars. The Guard's strength lies in numbers, in tactics born not of genius, but of inevitability. Wave after wave of infantry, advancing under the thunder of artillery. Lines of tanks rolling behind them, churning the earth to mud. Airstrikes screaming overhead, the skies ablaze with contrails and fire. And through it all, the commissars, pistols ready, ensuring the line never falters. Losses are irrelevant. 10,000 guardsmen may fall, but if one guardsman stands at the end, the Imperium calls it victory. The enemy believes the Guard weak, and in a way they are right. A single guardsman is fragile, disposable, forgettable, but the Guard does not fight as one. It fights as millions, as billions. No foe can stand against that tide forever. Orcs are drowned in fire until their warbands collapse. Tyranid swarms are blasted apart, their hive ships burned from orbit. Even the heretics of chaos are ground down, their dark champions buried beneath endless waves of mortal flesh. The Guard does not seek glory. It does not seek honor. Its only purpose is survival, and in survival it is unmatched. For every guardsman who dies, another rises. For every tank destroyed, another rolls from the Manufactoria. For every regiment lost, another is born from the ashes of 1,000 worlds. The galaxy mocks the lasgun. It mocks the fragility of the common soldier. But no one laughs when the Guard arrives in force. When the sky darkens with troop ships. When the ground shakes with 1,000,000 marching boots. When the horizon burns red with lasfire and artillery. In that moment, even the gods of the warp must take notice. For the Astra Militarum is not an army. It is humanity itself weaponized. This is the power of the Guard. Not the strength of one, but the weight of all. An unending tide that drowns the galaxy in sacrifice. His name was Darren Cole. Once he was nothing more than a hab worker. He repaired broken pipes in the underhive, patched leaks in the sewage ducts. It was not glamorous. It was not easy. But it was life. He had a wife, Mara. He had a son, barely 10 years old. Every day, he labored in the stinking dark, earning just enough ration credits to keep his family alive. Every night he returned home to a single dim lumen, and the sound of his boy laughing. Then came the tithe. The press gang stormed the hab blocks, armed with shock mauls and data pads. Names were called. Numbers taken. No one was asked. No one was given a choice. When Darren's name was spoken, Mara wept. His son clutched his arm, refusing to let go. The arbitrators tore them apart. And just like that, he was a guardsman. There was no training for Darren, only a lasgun shoved into his hands. Only a uniform 2 sizes too large, stained from the sweat of the man who wore it before. He was herded into the transport ship like cattle, crammed among thousands of others who had lived the same story. Days blurred into weeks in the void. The stench of fear, sweat, and despair was all around. Men whispered of home. Some prayed. Others sat in silence, staring into nothing, already broken before the war even began. When the ship finally descended, Darren saw a sky of fire. The world below was ash and ruin. Trenches carved into mud stretched to the horizon. Explosions lit the distance like a storm without end. He was thrown into the line the same day. No speeches, no encouragement, just an order. Forward. Darren had never fired a lasgun before. His hands shook as he raised it. The enemy came, howling shapes in the dark, shadows with teeth and claws. He fired blindly, beams of red light cutting through the smoke. Most missed. Some struck. He did not know. He did not care. Around him, men fell. Screams filled the air. A boy no older than his son was torn apart beside him. Darren wanted to run, but the commissar's bolt pistol was at his back, and so he stayed. Hours passed like years. The line broke, reformed, broke again. Bodies piled high in the mud, their faces half buried, their eyes staring at the uncaring sky. Darren kept fighting, though he no longer knew why. When the enemy charge finally faltered, there was no victory. Only silence. Only the moans of the dying. Only the stink of blood and ozone. Darren stumbled through the trench, his lasgun slick with mud. He thought of Mara. He thought of his son. He wondered if they would ever know what became of him. He wondered if they would even remember his name when so many others had been lost. And in that moment, Darren understood the truth. He was not a man. He was not a husband. He was not a father. He was just another guardsman. Disposable, replaceable, forgotten. The next day, the order came again. Forward, always forward. And Darren obeyed. Because in the Imperium, there is no other choice. The world of Varos was already dying. Its skies bled fire. Its oceans boiled with ash. But the Emperor demanded it endure, at least for one more day. The enemy had come in numberless hordes. Xenos, their forms twisted, their hunger endless. For weeks the Guard had held the line, trench by trench, street by street. Now all that remained was one final stand. Sergeant Kellen barked orders, his voice hoarse, his throat raw. His veterans lined the barricades, laser guns charged, bayonets fixed. Every man and woman knew what awaited them. None expected to leave the field alive. Joran Hale, the boy-turned guardsman, stood among them. His hands trembled, but his eyes burned with something more than fear. He had seen too much death to turn back now. He had nothing left but the fight. Beside him stumbled Darren Cole, the conscripted worker. His face was hollow, his spirit nearly broken. But he gripped his laser gun all the same, because there was no other choice. Because the Commissar's pistol never wavered. The earth shook as the enemy advanced. The horizon blackened with their forms. The ground quivered beneath millions of clawed feet. And still the Guard did not break. Fire! A wall of red light erupted. Dozens fell. Hundreds burned. But for every enemy that fell, 1,000 more surged forward. The air filled with the scream of dying men, the roar of alien beasts. Lehman Russ tanks thundered from behind the lines. Their cannons cracked open the battlefield, shells exploding in blossoms of flame. Basilisks roared from the rear, the ground trembling as entire swarms were erased. But the tide did not stop. Sergeant Kellen drew his chainsword. "Hold the line!" The veterans roared as one, plunging into the melee, blades and bayonets flashing in the smoke. Joran followed, his laser gun spitting light, his voice lost in the chaos. Darren stumbled, slipped in the mud, nearly fell. But then he remembered Mara's face, his son's laughter, and somehow he rose again. For one moment he was more than a conscript. He was a soldier. The line wavered. It buckled, but it did not break. Above, the skies split apart. The enemy fleet descended, raining fire upon the city. Guard ships answered, orbital cannons lancing through the heavens, tearing voidcraft to shreds. The entire planet had become a furnace, and then came the order no guardsman ever wished to hear. Exterminatus. The Imperium had deemed Varos lost. No retreat, no salvation, only fire. The first torpedoes fell like meteors. The ground split apart, oceans vaporized, mountains shattered into dust. The battlefield itself was consumed in the blast, guardsmen and enemy alike reduced to shadows upon stone. Joran never knew the end. One moment he was fighting, his laser gun blazing, his voice hoarse from screaming. The next there was only white fire, and then nothing. Darren saw the sky ignite. He thought of Mara, he thought of his son, and for the briefest of moments he smiled. Because if he was to die, then at least the galaxy could never take them too. Sergeant Kellen stood upon the barricade, chainsword dripping as the fire consumed him. He did not flinch. He did not cry out. He died as he had lived, defiant, unbroken, loyal to the last breath. And Varos was no more, a single world erased in fire. Millions of souls, sacrificed in the Emperor's name. The Guard had not failed. The Guard had obeyed. And in the Imperium of man, obedience is all that matters. The fleet pulled away as the planet cracked and burned. Not one guardsman survived. Not one name was remembered. Only the ash remained, drifting silently in the void. And yet, for the High Lords of Terra, it was victory. Another line in a ledger of blood. Another sacrifice to keep the Imperium alive for one more day. Varos was gone. Its skies silenced, its oceans turned to steam, its cities reduced to dust. From orbit there was no sign of life, only a glowing scar upon the void. The Imperium did not mourn. There was no time for mourning. Worlds die every day. Worlds are born in fire and end in silence, and the galaxy does not stop to grieve. The Administratum recorded the loss in a single line of script. Varos, Exterminatus declared by order of the Ordo Hereticus. Nothing more. No names, no stories. No memory of the billions who once lived there. To the soldiers of the Guard, death is not an end. It is the expectation. Every man who dons the uniform knows he may not return. But knowing this does not make the sacrifice easier. It only makes it inevitable. Somewhere, on a distant hive world, another conscription begins. Another Darren Cole will be torn from his family. Another Jorn Hale will trade youth for a rifle. Another Sergeant Kellen will lead men and women to their deaths, their loyalty unshaken even as their bodies break. The cycle does not end. It cannot end, because the enemies of mankind are endless, and the Imperium demands blood without measure. For every guardsman who falls, 10 more rise. For every regiment destroyed, 100 more are raised. And though each man dies forgotten, together they are eternal. This is the paradox of the Guard. Individually, they are nothing. Together they are everything, and yet, the human cost is infinite. Entire generations erased in the mud of alien worlds. Entire bloodlines extinguished in the fire of exterminatus. No statues are raised in their honor. No hymns are sung in their names. Still, the Guard fights. Not because they believe in victory. Not because they expect survival. But because they are ordered to. And in the Imperium of man, obedience is the only virtue that matters. Darren's son will never know what became of him. Jorn's name will never be etched into any record. Kellen's courage will never be remembered by the High Lords of Terra. Their stories end here, buried in ash, scattered across the void. And yet, perhaps that is the true essence of the Guard. Not heroes, not champions, not legends, but ordinary men and women who die nameless, forgotten, and countless. For the enemies of mankind, there is no greater terror than that truth, that no matter how many they kill, no matter how many worlds they burn, humanity always sends more. An endless tide. A tide that drowns the galaxy in blood. The Guard does not fight for glory. The Guard does not fight for honor. The Guard fights because there is no other choice. And in the silence after Varos, in the void where a world once burned, one truth lingers. For every guardsman who takes up a lasgun, 10 more will die nameless in the mud. And still, the Imperium endures. Varos is gone. Its people erased. Its soldiers silenced. Its name reduced to ash in the archives of Terra. But the galaxy does not rest. Even as one world burns, another cries out. Even as one regiment falls, another marches to war. The Imperium endures, but at a cost written in blood. And for the Astra Militarum there is no end to sacrifice. Yet, not all who fight for the Emperor remain loyal. Not all who march beneath his banner do so forever. Some hear whispers in the dark. Some trade faith for power. Some abandon humanity itself and embrace the ruinous gods. What becomes of a guardsman who betrays his oath? What fate awaits those who fall to chaos? That is a story for another time.